A woman living in isolation in the mountains finds her world shattered when 8 Comanche warriors arrive with a terrifying message. Her missing brother is alive, but taken by an ancient evil unleashed from a sacred mountain. To save him and stop the spreading darkness, she must join forces with her traditional enemies on a perilous journey into the heart of the supernatural. A story of family, forgiveness, and a fight against a hunger that threatens to consume the human soul. Subscribe and like for more epic tales of the Wild West. The mountains didn't give up their secrets easily. Ilara's homestead was carved into the side of one such secret-keeping peak, a stubborn patch of life in a landscape of sheer rock and whispering pines. She lived there alone, had for 3 years, ever since the rest of her family had given up on the harsh isolation and returned east. Everyone that was, except for her younger brother Caleb. He hadn't given up. He'd vanished. One day he'd ridden out to hunt and never returned. The mountains had kept that secret closest of all. Ilara had stayed, partly out of stubbornness, partly out of a futile hope that the mountains might yet give him back. Her only neighbors were the Comanche of the high band, who inhabited the higher, more sacred valleys. They kept to themselves, and she kept to herself. A tense but respectful silence between them. That silence was broken by the sound of hooves. Not the clumsy plod of a settler's horse, but the rhythmic, sure-footed gait of mustangs. Ilara stepped onto her porch, her hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. 8 riders. Comanche warriors. They moved with a purpose that set her nerves on edge. They did not approach with war cries, but with a solemn, deliberate pace that was somehow more intimidating. They reined in before her cabin. Their leader, an older man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held the depth of the canyons, raised a hand in a gesture of peace. He did not smile. "You are the sister of Caleb," he stated. It wasn't a question. Ilara's heart clenched. "I am," she said, her voice tight. "What do you know of him?" The leader's gaze was heavy. "I am called Talks to the Wind. 3 winters past, our paths crossed. He saved the life of my son during a rockfall. He was a brave man. A good man," a flicker of warmth, quickly extinguished by dread. "He's been gone a year." Talks to the Wind nodded slowly. "We know. We have searched for him. For you." He gestured to the men behind him. "We have ridden far. What we have to say is not for the wind to hear. May we speak inside?" This was unheard of. Comanche warriors did not ask to enter a white woman's cabin. The formality, the gravity, chilled her more than any threat could have. She nodded and led them inside. The 8 men filled her small home, their presence making the walls feel closer. Talks to the Wind did not sit. He stood in the center of the room and began to speak, his voice low and resonant. "Your brother did not vanish. He was taken. Not by animal, not by accident." He paused, letting the words hang. "He was taken by men who dig. Men who tear at the flesh of the mountain with iron teeth. They look for the yellow iron that drives white men mad. Prospectors." Ilara felt a surge of bitter anger. Greed had taken her brother. Talks to the Wind continued. "We did not know this then. We know it now because these diggers have awakened something that should have slept. They broke into a sealed place. A place of old power. My people have always known of it. We leave it be." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw fear that was ancient and profound. "The men who took your brother to dig for them, they are no longer men. The thing from the sealed place, it wears them. It walks in their skins. It speaks with their voices, but it is hollow inside. It is a hunger that walks like a man." Ilara stared, her mind refusing to grasp the horror he was describing. Possession? Demons? It was the stuff of campfire stories. "The mountain is sick with it." Another warrior spoke, his voice grim. "The game is leaving. The water tastes of ash." Talks to the Wind stepped closer to Ilara. "We cannot fight this thing. It is not of this world. Our arrows pass through it. Our prayers do not touch it. But it has a weakness. It fears the names of the ones it has taken. It fears the memory of who they were before it hollowed them out. He fixed his dark eyes on her. Your brother's name is a weapon. His memory is a shield. He fought for his life. His spirit is still strong inside the shell that walks. It calls for you. We have heard it on the wind. He placed a hand on his chest. We are here because a debt is owed. Your brother saved my son's life. Now we will help you save his spirit. We will take you to the Digger's Canyon. But you must be the one to call him back. You must be the one to face the Hollow Men and speak the name they fear. Ilara stood frozen, the weight of the impossible choice crashing down on her. They were asking her to walk into a nightmare, to confront something she couldn't understand. Armed with nothing but her brother's name, the 8 warriors waited in silence, their faces etched with a resolve that told her this was not a request. It was a duty. For the debt. For the mountain. For Caleb. The Comanche say Ilara's brother is alive but possessed by an ancient evil from the mountain. Can a name and a memory really defeat a supernatural entity? Why are the Comanche, who are known for their fierceness, unable to fight this thing themselves? What exactly did the prospectors awaken? Share your theories in the comments below. The silence in the cabin was heavier than any Ilara had ever known. The Comanche warriors watched her, their patience as deep and unyielding as the mountains themselves. They had not asked. They had presented a truth and a path. The choice was hers, but it felt less like a choice and more like a destiny she had been stumbling toward for a year. How do you know his spirit still fights? Ilara asked, her voice barely a whisper, clinging to that one sliver of hope. Talks to the Wind's expression did not change. The wind carries many sounds. Most are for anyone to hear. The cry of an eagle, the rush of water. Some sounds are only for those who know how to listen. We hear his struggle. It is a faint song against a great noise. But it is there. It was enough. It had to be enough. I will go, she said. The words feeling both terrifying and right. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of her courage. Only a series of grim nods. This was not an adventure. It was a grim necessity. Talks to the Wind gestured to one of the younger warriors. The man stepped forward and handed Ilara a small folded piece of cloth. It was faded and worn. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. It was Caleb's old blue neckerchief, the one he always wore. There was a dark, rusty stain on one corner. We found this near the sealed place, Talks to the Wind said. Before the digging. It is a piece of him. It will hold his memory for you when the darkness tries to make you forget. Ilara clutched the fabric, the faint, familiar scent of her brother leather, pine, and sunshine cutting through the dust of the cabin. It was the most painful and precious thing she had ever held. They left immediately. Ilara saddled her sturdy mare, her movements automatic, her mind a whirlwind of fear and a desperate, burning hope. The Comanche mounted their agile mustangs, and together they left the homestead behind, riding deeper into the heart of the secret-keeping mountains. Talks to the Wind rode at the front, setting a punishing pace. They did not follow any trail Ilara could see, moving instead along game paths and rocky ledges that seemed to defy gravity. The higher they climbed, the more the air changed. It grew colder, thinner, and carried a strange metallic tang that stuck in the back of her throat. The vibrant life of the lower slopes, the birds. The squirrels vanished, replaced by an eerie, watchful silence. As they navigated a narrow pass between 2 towering peaks. Talks to the Wind fell back to ride beside her. The thing they awakened, Ilara ventured, needing to break the silence, to understand the enemy. What is it? The old warrior was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning the cliffs above as if expecting an attack from the rocks themselves. In the time before memory, our stories say, there were beings of great power. Not gods, older, they were of the earth itself, but they hungered for more than rock and water. They hungered for the heat of life, for spirit. They were sealed away by the first people, locked in stone, to protect the world of the living. He looked at her, his face grave. The diggers did not find gold. They found a tomb, and they broke it open. The scale of the horror began to dawn on Alara. This was no local ghost story. This was something primordial. They rode for hours, the sun beginning to dip behind the highest peaks, casting long distorted shadows that seemed to grasp at them. Finally, Talks to the Wind raised a hand, bringing the party to a halt. He pointed ahead to where the mountain pass opened into a small, bowl-shaped valley. There, he said quietly. Alara's breath caught. The valley was a blight. The trees were stripped bare, their branches like skeletal claws against the darkening sky. The ground was churned and muddy, littered with mining equipment, broken carts, rusted picks, a collapsed sluice box. And in the center of it all, carved into the base of the mountain, was a black, gaping hole. The entrance to the mine, but it was the camp that made her blood run cold. A few ragged tents were still standing, and a fire smoldered in a central pit. Figures moved around it slowly, shuffling, their movements all wrong. They were too stiff, too deliberate, like puppets on strings. Even from this distance, Alara could feel it. A pressure, a wrongness. It was the feeling of being watched by something that did not have eyes. The hollow men, she whispered. Talks to the Wind nodded. They do not sleep. They do not eat. They only guard. They wait. For what? For the hunger inside them to grow strong enough to leave this place. To walk into the world. He turned to her, his expression stark. Your brother is down there. In the dark. His song is strongest near the mouth of the mine. He is trying to get out. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. We cannot go closer. Our presence, our fear, it feeds the thing. It makes it stronger. You must go alone. You must walk into the camp. You must call his name. Call his memory. Your love for him is a light it cannot bear. It is the only thing that can cut him free from the darkness. Alara looked from the terrifying camp below to the faces of the 8 warriors. They were not abandoning her. They were standing as a rearguard against an enemy they could not fight, holding the line at the edge of the nightmare. She was the spearhead, and her only weapon was her voice. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, clutching Caleb's neckerchief in a white-knuckled grip, Alara dismounted. She began the long, lonely walk down into the valley of the hollow men. Alara must walk alone into a camp of possessed hollow men. The Comanche say her love and his name are her only weapons. But what will happen when she calls to him? Will the real Caleb answer? Or will the entity controlling him attack? How can she possibly succeed where warriors failed? The descent into the valley begins. Comment your predictions. Each step down into the valley felt like a mile. The air grew thicker, colder, saturated with the metallic taste of wrongness. The smoldering fire in the camp pit cast a flickering, hellish light, making the shuffling figures seem to jump and twitch in the periphery. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. She could feel the weight of the Comanche's gazes from the ridge behind her, their faith a tangible force pushing her forward. The hollow men took no notice of her at first. They moved in slow, purposeless circles, their actions mimicking the chores of living men stoking the fire, tending to non-existent gear, but it was a grotesque pantomime. One man stood near the mine entrance, simply rocking back and forth on his heels, his head tilted at an impossible angle. Then, as she reached the outskirts of the camp, they stopped. All of them. As one, their heads turned toward her. No recognition, no curiosity. Just a blank, terrifying attention. Their eyes were the worst part, dull and glassy, like stones at the bottom of a creek. Alara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The neckerchief in her hand felt like her only tether to reality. One of the figures, a big man with a matted beard and a prospector's build, took a stiff step toward her. Then another. His mouth opened, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a dry, rasping click, like stones grinding together. Panic threatened to paralyze her. This was madness. She was going to die here, but then she clutched the faded blue cloth. Tighter. Caleb. His memory was a spark in the overwhelming dark. She hadn't come this far to fail him. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the advancing horror, and focused on her brother. Not on the man he might have become, but on the boy he was. His infectious laugh. The way his face would light up when he figured out how to fix a broken hinge. The time he'd stayed up all night with a sick calf. She poured every ounce of that memory, that love, into her voice. Caleb. She called out, her voice stronger than she felt. It wasn't a shout of fear, but a call of remembrance. Caleb, it's Alara. I'm here. I remember you. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The advancing hollow man recoiled as if struck, letting out a shrill, furious hiss. The other figures shuddered, their stiff movements becoming agitated, confused. The thing inside them didn't like the name. It didn't like the memory dot, but from the dark maw of the mine, something else happened. A sound. Faint but unmistakable. A human groan, filled with pain and effort. Caleb. Alara cried again, taking a step forward, her fear now eclipsed by a wild, desperate hope. Fight it. I know you're in there. Remember the homestead. Remember the smell of rain on the dry earth. Another groan, louder this time. And then a voice, ragged and torn, echoed from the mine's depths. Alara. It was him. It was him, but the entity fought back. The hollow men let out a unified screech of rage that tore through the valley. The big prospector lunged for her, his movements no longer stiff but terrifyingly fast. Alara stumbled backward, falling into the mud. She scrambled away, still clutching the neckerchief, still calling his name. As the hollow man loomed over her dot suddenly, a war cry echoed from the ridge, fierce, defiant, and full of power. Talks to the Wind and his warriors had dismounted and stood in a line, their voices raised in an ancient song. It was not a song of attack, but of remembrance. A song of their own ancestors, of their own love for the land. They were fighting the darkness with light, just as she was. The distraction was enough. The hollow man above her hesitated, its head snapping toward the sound. From the mine, Caleb's voice came again, stronger now, a roar of pure defiance. Get away from my sister. A figure erupted from the mine entrance. It was Caleb, but barely recognizable. He was gaunt, covered in grime, his clothes hanging in rags. But his eyes were his own, blazing with a fierce, desperate light. He held a rusted mining pickaxe in his hands. He didn't attack the hollow men. He swung the pickaxe at the wooden support beam right next to the mine entrance. The old, rotten wood splintered with a catastrophic crack. The mountain groaned in response. The hollow men froze, their connection to the entity seemingly disrupted by the sudden violence to its lair. Caleb didn't stop. The entrance! He yelled at Alara, his voice raw. Ida hates the light. Ida hates the open air. Collapse IT. He was buying them a chance. Not to kill the entity, but to trap it. Alara looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on a heavy sledgehammer leaning against a broken cart. She lunged for it, her muscles screaming with the effort to lift it. The hollow men were recovering, turning their attention back to the greater threat, the two people. Trying to seal their prison, Talks to the Wind saw their intent. Cover them! He barked. The Comanche warriors didn't advance, but they knocked arrows to their bows. They couldn't kill the hollow men, but they could pin them, slow them down. Arrows whizzed past Alara, thudding into the ground at the feet of the advancing figures, making them flinch and stumble. It was enough. Alara reached the mine entrance next to her brother. Together, brother and sister, fueled by terror and a lifetime of shared love, swung their tools at the fragile support structure. Wood splintered. Rock shifted. With a final deafening roar, the entrance to the mine collapsed in a cloud of dust and rubble. Sealing the darkness within, the hollow men on the surface let out one last, unified shriek of despair, a sound that seemed to be sucked back into the sealed earth, and then collapsed into lifeless heaps on the ground. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged breathing of Alara and Caleb, and the distant song of the Comanche warriors, which now faded into a respectful silence. Caleb dropped the pickaxe and stumbled into his sister's arms. He was shaking violently. "It's still in there," he whispered, his voice hollow with trauma. "It's not dead. It's just trapped." Alara held him tight, tears cutting through the grime on her face. They had won a battle, not the war. The mountain's secret was safe again, for now. But they both knew, as they looked at the pile of rubble, that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. They collapsed the mine and stopped the hollow men. But the ancient entity is still alive, trapped inside. Caleb is free, but he's clearly traumatized. What lasting effects will his possession have? And is the mine strong enough to hold the entity forever, or will it find another way out? The immediate threat is over, but the danger is still buried. What happens next? Comment your predictions. The return to Ilara's homestead was a somber procession. Caleb rode behind her, slumped in the saddle, his body present, but his spirit seemingly still trapped in that dark valley. The 8 Comanche warriors flanked them, their watchful eyes scanning not for mundane threats, but for any sign that the darkness had followed them. The victory felt fragile, a thin sheet of ice over a bottomless black lake. They did not enter the cabin immediately. Talks to the Wind insisted on a cleansing ritual at the edge of the property. He burned sage, the sweet smoke curling around Caleb, and chanted low, guttural words in a language older than the mountains. Caleb endured it passively, his eyes vacant. When it was done, Talks to the Wind looked at Alara, his expression unreadable. "The shadow on him is deep," he said quietly. "We have brushed away what clung to his outside. But what got inside? Only time will tell if it can be scoured out." Inside the cabin, Caleb sat by the fire Alara built, wrapped in a blanket, shivering though the night was warm. He drank the broth she offered, but would not meet her eyes. The brave defiance he'd shown at the mine was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of the brother she knew. "Caleb?" she prompted gently. "What did it? What did it feel like?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice, a dry rasp, filled the small space. It was cold, so cold. And it was loud. Not with sound, with emptiness. It's a hunger that screams in silence. It showed me things, memories, but twisted. He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was a physical blow. "It showed me you giving up on me. It showed me you leaving." It fed on that. Ilara's heart broke. The entity hadn't just imprisoned him. It had tortured him with his worst fears. "I would never," she whispered, clutching his hand. "I never stopped looking." He gave a weak, shuddering nod. "I know, now, but in there." It was the only truth. He closed his eyes, exhausted. "It's quiet now, but it's not gone. I can still feel the echo of its emptiness. In here." He tapped his temple. Talks to the Wind, who had been observing silently from the doorway, spoke. "The thing in the mountain is a master of lies. It weaponizes doubt. Your brother's spirit won the fight for his body, but the battle for his mind is not over." As if on cue, Caleb's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been full of pain, now glazed over, becoming distant and cold. When he spoke again, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "It says you will leave. It says everyone leaves. The mountain always wins," Ilara recoiled. It was her brother's mouth, but the words were the entity's. Talks to the wind moved quickly, not with fear, but with a solemn purpose. He stepped forward and placed his hands on either side of Caleb's face, forcing him to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, son of the mountain," the old warrior said, his voice imbued with a powerful authority. "The hunger lies. It has only the power you give it. Your memory is your weapon. Your sister's love is your shield. Hold on to it. Cling to it as you clung to your life in the dark." Caleb's body trembled, a violent struggle playing out across his features. The cold emptiness fought against the warmth of the words. For a terrifying moment, his eyes flickered with that ancient familiar darkness, and a cruel smile touched his lips. Then, he gasped, a great sucking breath as if breaking the surface of water. The darkness receded, and raw human terror took its place. He began to sob great, heaving sobs that racked his entire frame. Talks to the wind released him and stepped back, his own face etched with fatigue. "The poison is in the wound," he said to Ilara. "It will fester and flare. You must be vigilant. You must constantly remind him of who he is. The moment you forget, the hunger will remember." He looked toward the window, at the dark silhouette of the mountains. "And we have a more immediate problem. The entity is trapped, but it is not stupid. It knows it lost its vessels. It will be angry. And a thing that old, that patient, does not give up. It will look for a new way out. A new crack in the world." The implication hung in the air. The mind was sealed, but the entity's influence had already seeped out. It had touched Caleb's mind. It knew they were here. "What do we do?" Ilara asked, her voice small. "We do not wait for it to find a new way," Talks to the Wind said, his decision firm. "We must warn the other bands, and the white settlers in the valleys below. They must know the danger in the mountain. They must avoid the high places. They must not dig." It was a monumental task. The Comanche were not messengers to the white man, and the white man was not likely to believe a story of ancient mountain demons. "They will call us superstitious fools," Ilara said. "Then we must make them believe," Talks to the Wind replied. "We will show them the valley. We will show them the hollow men who are no longer hollow, but simply dead. The evidence is there." He turned to his warriors and issued commands in quick, sharp Comanche. They nodded and began to prepare to leave. "You will come with us," he said to Ilara, "and Caleb, your brother's testimony will be needed. And you cannot stay here. You are a beacon for its anger now." Ilara looked at Caleb, who was now sleeping fitfully by the fire, exhausted by his internal battle. He was in no state to travel. But staying was a greater risk. The plan was set. They would become unlikely heralds, a Comanche war party and 2 white settlers, riding to warn a world that didn't want to be warned. They weren't just fighting an entity anymore. They were fighting disbelief. And the clock was ticking. Every moment they spent was a moment the hunger in the mountain had to find a new weakness, a new pair of hands to pick up a shovel and start digging. The entity is trying to possess Caleb from a distance using his trauma. They're leaving to warn others, but will anyone believe their incredible story? What new crack could the entity exploit to get out? Another group of prospectors? A natural disaster? And can Caleb's fragile mind survive the journey? The mission has changed from rescue to prevention. What will they face first? Comment your predictions. Dawn broke, cold and gray. Caleb was pale and shaky, but the fire in his eyes had returned, banked by a fierce determination to not let the thing in the mountain win. The Comanche warriors moved with a quiet efficiency, readying the horses. The plan was clear: Ride for the nearest settlement, Fort Wade, a day's journey to the east. It was a trading post, a military outpost, and a hub for prospectors heading into the mountains. If a warning needed to be spread, that was the place to start. The journey was tense. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered threat. Caleb flinched at sudden noises, his knuckles white on the reins. Elara rode beside him, a constant, steady presence, telling stories of their childhood, anchoring him in the past the entity had tried to corrupt. Talks to the Wind and his men formed a protective circle around them, their eyes constantly scanning the high ridges. They were not just looking for physical danger anymore. They were watching for signs: a sudden flight of birds, an unnatural silence, a patch of blighted land dot as they neared Fort Wade. Following a well-worn trader's path, one of the younger warriors, Sharp Eye, who had been scouting ahead, came riding back at a gallop. He spoke rapidly to Talks to the Wind in Comanche, his expression urgent. Talks to the Wind's face hardened. He turned to Elara and Caleb. The path ahead is blocked. Not by rock or river. By people, a wagon train. 20 wagons or more. They are camped in the next valley. A wagon train. Families. Children. Right in the path of the danger they were trying to warn about. We have to tell them. Elara said immediately. It is not so simple. Talks to the Wind replied, his voice grim. They are led by a man named Colonel Briggs, a former soldier. He knows my people. He knows me. There is bad blood. He will not listen to words from our mouths. He's a man who believes only in lead and iron, a dilemma. They could skirt wide around the wagon train and continue to Fort Wade, leaving these people unknowing and vulnerable. Or they could try to deliver their warning and likely face hostility, even violence. Caleb spoke up, his voice still rough but firm. We can't leave them. If that thing gets out, it'll go for the closest source of life. That's them. He looked at Elara, a flicker of the entity's cold insight in his eyes, but now used for good. It's already looking for a way. I can feel it. It's pushing at the walls. It's hungry. His words decided it. They had to try. They approached the wagon train from the high ground, staying in clear view to avoid being mistaken for a raiding party. The camp was a bustling, noisy affair. Oxen lowed, children shouted. The smells of coffee and smoke filled the air. It was a picture of normalcy that felt like a dream after the horrors of the mountain dot, as predicted. Their approach caused instant alarm. Men scrambled for rifles, forming a rough defensive line. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a steel-gray beard and a military bearing stepped forward, a heavy revolver on his hip. Colonel Briggs. That's far enough. Talks to the Wind. He boomed, his voice accustomed to command. You and your savages turn around now. You're not welcome here. Talks to the Wind reined in his horse, his expression neutral. We do not come for trouble, Colonel. We come with a warning. Briggs let out a short, harsh laugh. A warning? The only warning I need is the sight of painted Comanche on the ridge. Now leave before I order my men to clear you out. Elara nudged her horse forward, drawing Briggs's suspicious glare. Sir, please, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. My name is Elara. This is my brother Caleb. What we have to say sounds insane, but you must listen. There is a danger in the mountains. Sickness. It's already taken men. It will spread. Caleb urged his horse beside hers. His pallor and the intensity in his eyes were hard to ignore. It's real, he said, his voice carrying a haunting weight. It gets in your head. It turns you into a hollow shell. It's trapped for now, but it won't stay that way. You have to turn your wagons around. You can't go higher into the mountains. For a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Briggs's face. The raw terror on Caleb's was genuine and unsettling. But then his jaw set. A sickness? Hollow men? Are you listening to yourselves? You've been out in the sun too long, boy. Or these heathens have filled your head with nonsense. He spat on the ground. I've got 40 good men and women here. We're not turning around because of a campfire story. It was happening exactly as Talks to the Wind had predicted. Disbelief, born of prejudice and fear. It is not a story, Talks to the Wind said, his voice low and dangerous. The mountain is awake, and it is hungry. His choice of words was a mistake. To Briggs, it sounded like a superstitious threat. That's enough. Briggs snarled, drawing his revolver. His men raised their rifles. I'll give you to the count of 3 to get back on your side of the mountain. 1, they were out of time. Out of options. The Comanche warriors tensed, hands going to their own weapons. A fight here would be a bloodbath and would doom everyone. Suddenly, a young boy, no more than 6, broke from the wagon circle, chasing a runaway chicken. In his glee, he didn't see a rut in the ground. He tripped and fell hard, letting out a sharp cry of pain. It was a simple human moment. But in the supercharged tension, it was like a spark, and the mountain, ever listening, ever hungry, seized its chance. The boy's cry of pain seemed to echo, twisting, amplifying. The air around the wagon train grew instantly, bitingly cold. The cheerful shouts of the children cut off, replaced by a confused silence. From the woods at the edge of the camp, a low, grinding groan echoed, the sound of stone moving against stone. Every head turned. The entity couldn't manifest fully, not from so far away. But it could project. It could amplify fear. It could show them. Shadows between the trees deepened, coalescing into shifting, human-like forms that had no business moving like humans. A whisper, a chorus of dry, rasping clicks swept through the camp, though the leaves on the trees were still. The boy on the ground scrambled up, his face white with a terror far beyond a scraped knee. He was staring into the woods, pointing a trembling finger. The empty men. He whimpered. The illusion lasted only a few seconds before fading. But it was enough. The confident sneer had vanished from Colonel Briggs's face, replaced by a pallor that rivaled Caleb's. His men lowered their rifles, their bravado shattered by a fear they couldn't explain or shoot. The entity had done what words could not. It had made them believe. It had also shown them it was already here. The entity just projected an illusion to the entire wagon train to prove its existence. Now they believe, but they're also terrified and trapped. How can they possibly protect a large, vulnerable group from a supernatural threat that can attack their minds? The enemy has shown its power. What is their next move? Comment your predictions. The air in the wagon train camp was thick with a terror so potent you could taste it. The brief, horrifying vision of the empty men had shattered Colonel Briggs's world of rifles and reason. He stood frozen, his revolver hanging limply at his side, staring into the now-still woods where the shadows had just danced with malevolent life. It's real, he breathed, the words a horrified confession. The sneering colonel was gone, replaced by a man facing an enemy he couldn't comprehend. The Comanche warriors didn't gloat. They saw only the increased danger. The entity had stretched its influence far from its mountain prison to deliver a message. I see you, and I can reach you. Talks to the Wind seized the moment of stunned silence. Your lead and iron are useless against this, he said to Briggs, his voice cutting through the panic. It fights with the mind. It feeds on fear. The more you fear, the stronger it becomes. The louder it hears you. His words acted like a bucket of cold water on the rising hysteria. Mothers clutched their children, their cries stifled into whimpers. The men looked from their rifles to the darkening woods, feeling utterly helpless. We have to leave. Now, a settler shouted, voice cracking. And go where? Caleb answered, stepping forward. His own experience gave his words a terrible authority. It's in the land now. It's in the air. Running blind will just spread the fear, like throwing kindling on a fire. It'll lead you into a box canyon or over a cliff in the dark. It wants you to run. Ilara moved to stand beside her brother, addressing the terrified crowd. He's right. Our only chance is to stand together. It hates light. It hates unity. It thrives on isolation and panic. A plan, desperate and born of necessity, formed. They couldn't outrun it. They had to outlast it. Until dawn? Longer? No one knew. Colonel Briggs, though shaken, was still a leader. He grasped the tactical reality. Circle the wagons. He barked, his old command voice returning, though it now held a new grim purpose. Tighten the perimeter. I want every lantern, every torch, every candle we have lit and placed on the outer ring. I want no shadows inside the circle. The camp erupted into a frantic but organized buzz of activity. The settlers, galvanized by clear orders, worked alongside the Comanche warriors. It was an unprecedented sight. Comanche and white men, pulling together, stacking crates, driving wagon tons into the earth to reinforce the barricade. Children were put in the center wagons, surrounded by the elderly Dot as night fell. Their fortress of light was ready. A ring of wagons with a second inner ring of firelight lanterns hanging from posts. Torches jammed into the ground, campfires built up high. The valley was plunged into darkness, but the camp was an island of blazing defiance. Then, they waited Dot for the first few hours. Nothing happened. The silence was agonizing. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl made people jump. Then, the temperature dropped again, a cold that seeped into bones. The cheerful crackle of the fires seemed to dampen, the light from the flames wavering as if struggling to exist. They came not as figures this time, but as sounds. Whispers that slithered from the woods, just on the edge of hearing. They were fragments of personal fears, spoken in the voices of loved ones. Mama? I'm scared ... Quotes a child's voice whimpered from the blackness. This was a mistake. We should never have come west ... Quotes a woman's voice, full of despair. The Indians are coming. I see them. A man's voice shouted in panic. People clapped their hands over their ears, crying out. It was a psychological assault, designed to break their unity, to make them distrust each other, to see enemies within their own circle. Do not listen. Talks to the Wind's voice boomed, a rock in the storm of whispers. It is the hunger speaking. It has no voice of its own. It steals yours. Caleb stood with a group of men by the weakest point in the circle, his face beaded with sweat. The whispers were hardest for him. He heard his own voice among them, saying terrible things, urging him to open the circle, to let the darkness in. It's not real, Ilara said, gripping his arm, her touch an anchor. Remember the homestead. Remember the sunrise over the east ridge. That's real, he nodded, gritting his teeth. Fighting his internal battle silently. The entity, frustrated that its whispers weren't breaking them, changed tactics. The lights began to die. Not all at once. One by one, the torches and lanterns on the outer ring flickered and went out, as if snuffed by an unseen hand. Not by wind, the air was dead still. It was as if the darkness itself was consuming the light. A wave of terror swept through the camp as the circle of safety shrank. Men fumbled to relight the torches, but their hands were shaking, and the flints sparked uselessly. It's getting closer. Someone yelled. The Comanche warriors didn't try to relight the fires. They began to sing again, the same low, powerful chant from the valley. They weren't singing to fight the darkness now. They were singing to reinforce the light that remained. They poured their collective will, their connection to the living world, into the flames. Miraculously, the lanterns nearest them burned brighter, their light pushing back the oppressive gloom a few precious feet. It was a pattern. The entity would attack, dimming the lights, and the combined focus of the group, the settlers' desperate hope, the Comanche's ancient songs, Ilara's unwavering love for her brother, would push it back. They were in a stalemate. A war of wills fought over flickering flames, but the entity had an endless well of fear to draw from. The people were tiring. The children's cries were becoming more frequent. The lights were getting harder to hold bright. Colonel Briggs watched Talks to the Wind, seeing the strain on the old warrior's face as he led the chant. He saw the way the light responded. He had spent his life fighting men with a rifle. This was a different war. He walked to the front line, drew his revolver, and did something no one expected. He didn't aim it at the woods. He laid it on the ground in front of a guttering torch dot. Then he looked at the terrified settlers and began to sing. It was not a Comanche song. It was a hymn. Amazing Grace. His voice was rough and off-key, but it was full of a newfound, desperate faith. One by one, the settlers joined in. Their voices mingled with the Comanche chant, a dissonant but powerful chorus of defiance. Protestant hymns mixed with ancient prayers, all aimed at the same thing, affirming life in the face of the emptiness. The lights flared, brighter than ever, pushing the darkness back to the tree line. The night wore on, a brutal exhaustion of constant vigilance. But they held. Together, they held Dot as the first sliver of pale gray light appeared on the eastern horizon. The pressure broke. The cold lifted. The whispers ceased. The remaining lights burned steady and strong. They had survived the night, but as the relieved cheers went up, Talks to the Wind looked not at the rising sun, but at the mountain, its peak now touched with pink light. It was testing us, he said quietly to Alara and Briggs. Learning our strength, our weakness. It knows it cannot take a united group so easily. It will not try the same way again. The victory was real, but it was a warning. The entity was adaptable, and it was patient. The immediate threat was over, but the war for their minds and their souls had just begun. They held off the entity's psychic attack by combining their hope and will. But Talks to the Wind says it was just a test. What new, more clever strategy will the entity use now that it knows their defenses? How can they possibly get to Fort Wade with a large, slow-moving wagon train? The danger is smarter than they thought. What's the next move? Comment your predictions. The dawn light revealed a camp of exhausted, hollow-eyed survivors. The victory of the night felt distant, replaced by the grim reality voiced by Talks to the Wind. The entity had been probing them, learning. Their unity was their strength, but it was also a large, slow-moving target. A council was gathered inside Colonel Briggs's large supply wagon. The attendees were an unlikely assembly. Briggs, his face aged a decade overnight. Talks to the Wind, serene but weary, Alara, and Caleb, who despite his fatigue, insisted on being included. His first-hand knowledge was their most valuable intelligence. We cannot stay here, Briggs stated, his strategic mind finally engaging with the true nature of the threat. And we cannot take the wagons to Fort Wade. It's 2 days' travel at this pace. We'd be sitting ducks for another night. And the next one would be worse. Then we split up, Caleb said, his voice raspy. All eyes turned to him. He traced a finger on a rough map spread over a crate. It wants a feast. A big one. U.S. altogether. So we don't give it one. A small group. Fast riders. They take the warning to Fort Wade, get the cavalry, get the word out, evacuate the lower valleys. He looked at the adults, his gaze clear for the first time. The main group, the wagons. They don't go to Fort Wade. They go there. He pointed to a location on the map. Talks to the Wind had provided a box canyon a few hours to the north. The canyon has high walls, one narrow entrance. It's defensible. You can build a huge bonfire, light the whole place up like noon. A few people can hold it against anything that isn't an army. It was a brilliant, desperate gambit. It acknowledged the enemy's strategy and countered it by denying it a single large source of fear. Talks to the Wind nodded slowly, a glint of respect in his eyes for the young man. The canyon is a good choice. The stone walls hold memories of sun. The entity's influence is weaker there. But the small group ... He looked at the map. The fastest path to Fort Wade cuts close to the mountain's foothills. It is the most dangerous path. The hunger will feel them. It will throw everything it has at them to stop the warning. The unspoken question hung in the air. Who would lead this suicide mission? "I'll go," Elara said immediately. "No," Caleb and Briggs said in unison. "You're needed here," Briggs said to her. "You and the boy are the only ones who truly understand what we're facing. You can help hold this group together." He then turned to Talks to the Wind. "My lieutenant and my 2 best riders will go. They know the way." Talks to the Wind shook his head. "Your soldiers are brave, but they fight only what they can see. They will ride into an ambush of the mind and never see it coming." He placed a hand on the shoulder of the young warrior. "Sharp Eye. He will lead them. He knows the signs. He can feel the corruption in the land. He can guide them around the worst of it." It was a tense compromise, white soldiers and a Comanche scout on a joint mission. A microcosm of the larger alliance forced upon them by necessity. The plan was set. The camp broke into organized frenzy. The wagons were prepared for the move to the Box Canyon. Meanwhile, the lieutenant, 2 soldiers, and Sharp Eye readied the fastest horses. As the small party prepared to leave, Caleb approached Sharp Eye. He held out his old, faded blue neckerchief. "Take this," he said. It ... it helped me. It holds on to good memories. It might shield you a little." The Comanche warrior looked at the offering, then at Caleb's earnest face. He gave a solemn nod and tied the cloth around his own neck. It was a powerful symbol, a white man's token worn by a Comanche warrior for protection against a common, ancient foe. The riders left at a gallop, disappearing into the landscape. The rest of the group, a slow-moving snake of wagons and people, began the arduous trek north to the Box Canyon. The journey was a nightmare of tension. Every shadow was watched. Every strange sound made people flinch. But the entity, it seemed, was focused elsewhere. The attack they all expected didn't come. The silence was more unnerving than an assault. "They're testing the riders," Caleb murmured to Elara as they walked beside a wagon. "Seeing how strong they are. How much fear they have." It was taking the bait. They reached the Box Canyon by afternoon. It was perfect for defense. A narrow entrance that could be blocked with a few wagons. High walls that glowed red in the setting sun. They drove the wagons inside and immediately began gathering wood for a massive central fire. As dusk approached, the bonfire was lit, a roaring pillar of flame that pushed the deepening twilight back and filled the canyon with a puzzy, defiant light and thunderous crackle. Sentries were posted at the entrance, their nerves stretched taut. But still, nothing happened. The wait was agony. Had the riders made it? Had the entity caught them? Were they riding into a trap at Fort Wade? Then, a few hours into the night, it started. But not as before. It began with the children in the center of the camp. A little girl started crying, not in fear, but in sadness. "My dolly is lost," she wept. "She's all alone in the dark." Then a boy. "I want to go home. I miss my grandma." A wave of profound, debilitating sadness washed over the camp. It wasn't the sharp terror of the night before. It was a deep, soul-crushing despair. The entity had changed its tactic. It couldn't break them with fear, so it was trying to erode them with grief, to make them lose the will to fight altogether. People began to slump, overcome by memories of lost loved ones, of hardships, of regrets. The defensive energy of the camp began to waver. "It's not real," Elara shouted, but her voice sounded small against the tide of sorrow. "It's making you remember. It's twisting it." But it was a harder attack to fight. You couldn't shout down despair. Caleb, however, understood this weapon better than anyone. The entity had used it on him for a year. He climbed onto a wagon bench, his face pale but determined. Ida wants you to give up. He yelled, his voice cutting through the muffled sobs. Ida wants you to think it's hopeless. But it's not. My sister didn't give up on me. The Comanche didn't give up on us. Don't give up on each other. He pointed to the massive bonfire. Look at that. We made that together. That fire isn't just light. It's everyone here refusing to quit. Now remember what you're fighting for, not what you've lost. His words, born of intimate experience with the enemy's tricks, were a spark. A man stood up, wiping his eyes, and added more wood to the fire. A woman began to sing a lullaby to her crying child, her voice shaky but defiant. The wave of sadness didn't vanish, but it was met with a renewed, gritty determination. They were holding. Again, just before dawn, a new sound echoed from the canyon entrance, the sound of many hooves. The sentries shouted in alarm, but it wasn't an attack. Riding into the circle of light was Sharp Eye, followed by the lieutenant and the two soldiers. They were exhausted, covered in dust, but alive. And behind them rode a column of U.S. cavalry from Fort Wade. Sharp Eye rode straight to talks to the Wind and Briggs. He slid from his horse, his chest heaving. He untied the blue neckerchief from his neck and handed it back to Caleb. It was intact. The hunger tried to lead us astray. Sharp Eye reported, his eyes wide with the memory. It showed us false paths, made us hear voices of dying men. But the cloth, it helped. It held a strong memory. It was an anchor. We made it. The cavalry captain dismounted. We received your unusual message, he said to Briggs, his tone a mixture of skepticism and awe as he took in the massive bonfire and the exhausted, determined faces of the settlers in Comanche. The fort is on alert. We're here to escort you back. They had done it. The warning had gotten through, but as cheers of relief began to rise, Talks to the Wind looked east, toward the distant, sleeping mountain. His face was not relieved. It was grim. You have cavalry, he said to the captain. But you cannot shoot a shadow. You have escorts, but you cannot escort a whole territory. He turned to the group, his voice low. The hunger is still there. It is angry. And now it knows that its enemies can unite. The next move will be its. And it will not be a test. The rescue was not an ending. It was an escalation. The cavalry has arrived. The immediate rescue is here, but Talks to the Wind warns the entity is now angry and will change its strategy. It knows humans can unite against it. What will its next move be? A direct attack on Fort Wade? Corrupting someone in a position of power? The stakes have just gotten even higher. What is the entity's endgame? Comment your predictions. Fort Wade was a whirlwind of controlled panic. The arrival of over 40 terrified settlers, a band of Comanche warriors, and a story of mountain demons had shattered the outpost's routine. Skepticism was the first reaction, but the raw, unanimous terror of the wagon train families and the grim corroboration of Colonel Briggs and his own lieutenant forced the fort's commander, Captain Evans, to listen. They were crammed into Evans's office, the captain, Briggs, Talks to the Wind, Ilara, and Caleb. A map of the territory was spread on the desk. Evacuate? Captain Evans repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. He was a career soldier, his world defined by tangible threats, hostile tribes, outlaws, the elements. You're asking me to recommend the evacuation of every settlement, mine, and homestead in a 50-mile radius based on ghost stories and a bad feeling? It is not a feeling, Talks to the Wind said, his voice like grinding stone. It is a certainty. The hunger tested us. It learned. It will not test again. It will act. It can get into your mind, Captain, Caleb insisted, leaning forward. His hands were trembling slightly, but his gaze was steady. It doesn't need to attack the fort. It just needs to get to one person. Someone with authority. Someone who can give an order to open the gates, or to send the cavalry on a wild goose chase. or to start a panic inside these very walls. Captain Evans looked from Caleb's intense face to Briggs's grim one. He wanted to dismiss it as mass hysteria, but the logic was chillingly sound. The greatest military defeats often came from within. So what is your proposal? Evans asked, a muscle twitching in his jaw. A permanent cordon? We don't have the men. And what do I tell my superiors in Washington? That we're surrendering territory to a shadow? You tell them the truth, Ilara said. That the mountain is sick. That it's dangerous. That until we find a way to cure it or contain it for good, no one is safe there. Contain it how? Evans shot back, exasperated. With what army? It was Talks to the Wind who provided the answer, his finger stabbing down on the map, right at the heart of the mountain. With knowledge. We must seal the wound. Not with rubble, permanently. My people's stories speak of a way. A ritual of purification, to soothe the angry earth, to put the ancient sleepers back to rest. But it requires something from the mountain's heart. A stone, touched by the first sun and the first shadow. It is a long-forgotten way, a spiritual solution. To Captain Evans, it sounded like superstition piled on top of madness. Before he could voice his objection, a frantic knock came at the door. A young, pale-faced corporal entered without waiting for permission. Captain, sir. Message from the telegraph office. It's strange, sir. Spit it out, Corporal. The corporal swallowed hard. It's from the territorial governor's office, sir. But it doesn't make any sense. It orders the immediate stand down of all patrols in the region. It says to recall all men to the fort. And it says to welcome the beneficial mining interests and offer them every assistance. The corporal looked up, bewildered. But we haven't had any new mining claims filed, sir. And the governor would never. The room went cold. Caleb's prediction was coming true. The entity wasn't attacking with monsters. It was attacking with paperwork. It had found a crack. It had reached someone in the territorial government. Someone powerful enough to send orders that would isolate the fort, leave the territory undefended, and literally invite the one thing that could free it completely: more miners. It's already started, Caleb whispered. His face ashen. Captain Evans stared at the corporal, then at the stunned faces around his desk. The abstract had just become terrifyingly concrete. The enemy wasn't at the gates. It was in the telegraph wires. Corporal, Evans said, his voice suddenly very quiet and very serious. You will acknowledge that message. You will say, orders understood, and then you will consider it null and void. You will tell no one else of its contents. Is that clear? The corporal, wide-eyed, nodded sharply and fled. The line had been drawn. Captain Evans was now disobeying a direct order from his governor, based on the word of civilians and Comanche. He had chosen his side. We are out of time, Talks to the Wind said. The hunger moved faster than we feared. It seeks to clear the board before we can act. Then we act now, Ilara said, determination hardening her features. She looked at Talks to the Wind. This ritual. This stone. Where is it? The old Comanche's face was grim. It lies in the highest sacred valley. The same valley where the diggers first broke the seal. To reach it, we must walk into the heart of its strength. It was a suicide mission. But it was the only move they had left. I'll go, Caleb said immediately. No. Ilara and Briggs said together. You're the only one who knows what to look for. Caleb said to Talks to the Wind. But you can't go alone. It will be waiting for you. It needs someone who knows its tricks. Someone it's already tried to break. He looked at his sister. I have to go. It's the only way. He was right. They all knew it. Captain Evans finally nodded, embracing the madness fully. I can't send my men on a spiritual quest. But I can create a diversion. He pointed to the map. I'll lead a full cavalry patrol right up to the mouth of that valley. We'll make a lot of noise, draw its attention. It will be looking at the guns, not at the few of you slipping in behind. It was a plan. A desperate, insane plan. A small party would infiltrate the sacred valley. Talks to the wind. Caleb, Ilara, and Sharp Eye. Their goal: find the purification stone and perform the ritual, whatever it entailed. The rest of the cavalry and Briggs's settlers would hold Fort Wade, maintaining a facade of normalcy, waiting for an attack from within or without, and praying that a handful of people could somehow heal a mountain dot as they prepared to leave. Captain Evans stopped Caleb. "Son," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, "if this thing is in the telegraph wires, how do we know it's not listening to us right now?" Caleb met his gaze. "It probably is, but it's like a man listening to 100 conversations at once. It hears the loudest ones, the ones filled with the most fear, the most anger." He managed a weak smile. "So we have to be quiet, and we have to be sure." They moved out under the cover of the cavalry's noisy departure. As the column of blue-clad soldiers rode west, kicking up dust and drawing every eye, 4 figures slipped out a rear gate and turned their horses north toward the highest, most treacherous peaks. They were racing against an enemy that could bend the will of men and corrupt the very lines of communication. Their weapon was a forgotten ritual. Their hope was a fragile, traumatized young man, and the mountain waited. The entity is corrupting the government now. The team is on a quest for a magical stone to perform a purification ritual while the cavalry acts as a diversion. Will the entity see through the ruse? What dangers await in the sacred valley? And can a ritual really work against such an ancient, powerful evil? The final mission is underway. What will they find? Comment your predictions. The world narrowed to rock, sky, and a cold that seeped into the soul. Leaving the cavalry's diversion behind, Talks to the Wind led Ilara, Caleb, and Sharp Eye up paths that were little more than goat tracks. The air grew so thin it burned the lungs. The entity's presence was different here, not the aggressive, probing fear of the lowlands, but a deep, thrumming pressure, like the silent hum of a massive sleeping engine. They were approaching its source. Finally, they crested a razor-backed ridge, and Talks to the Wind held up a hand. Below them lay a valley unlike any other. It was untouched by the prospector's blight. Lush grass waved in the thin breeze, fed by a crystal-clear stream that glittered in the high-altitude sun. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in bursts of color. At the far end, a waterfall cascaded down a sheer rock face into a misty pool. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a place of profound peace, but it was a peace that felt watchful, ancient. The heart of the mountain, Talks to the Wind whispered, his voice filled with reverence. The hunger defiles it from its prison below, but it has not yet corrupted this place. It is why the ritual must be done here. The land still remembers how to be whole. The contrast with the blighted mining valley was staggering. Here, life thrived. There, only death and shadow. "The stone," Caleb said, his eyes scanning the valley. "Where is it?" Talks to the Wind pointed to the waterfall. "There, behind the water. A cave. The stone rests where the first light of dawn touches the water and the last shadow of dusk retreats. It is a bridge between light and dark. It is the balance." They picked their way down into the valley. The air felt cleaner, easier to breathe, yet the pressure intensified. It was the feeling of being in a sacred place where they were guests, and their purpose was graved out as they neared the waterfall, the thunder of the water drowning out all other sound. Sharp Eye, who had been scouting ahead, suddenly stopped. He pointed to the wet, rocky ground near the pool, "That footprints, not fresh ones." Ilara's blood ran cold. They weren't alone. Talks to the Wind examined them, his face grim. "They are not Comanche. They are not settler." He looked toward the cave behind the waterfall. The hunger did not just send its influence to the governor. It sent men. The entity had anticipated them. It couldn't enter the sacred valley itself, but it could send puppets to do its work, to desecrate the ritual site before they could even begin. Caleb drew a deep breath, a new resolve hardening his features. The entity's move, instead of causing fear, ignited a cold fury in him. "It's scared," he said. "It wouldn't be trying to stop us if the ritual couldn't work. They had to get into that cave." Talks to the Wind gestured to Sharp. "Aye." The two warriors melted into the rocks flanking the waterfall, moving with a silence that was itself a weapon. Ilara and Caleb followed as best they could. Their hearts hammering. They slipped behind the curtain of cascading water into a damp, dimly lit cavern. The air inside was cool and smelled of whetstone and ozone. And there, in the center of the cave, was the stone. It was unassuming, a smooth, flat disc of obsidian about the size of a wagon wheel embedded in the cave floor. Its surface wasn't pure black. It seemed to hold swirling depths, capturing and holding the faint light that filtered through the waterfall. But standing around it were three men. They were ragged, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky. Prospectors, the entity's newest hollow men. They held picks and shovels, and they were trying to pry the stone from its ancient resting place. They hadn't noticed the newcomers yet. Talks to the Wind didn't hesitate. He didn't attack the men. He began to chant, his voice a low, powerful rumble that resonated through the cave, harmonizing with the waterfall's roar. It was the ritual. He was starting it now, whether they were ready or not. The effect on the hollow men was immediate and violent. They shrieked, dropping their tools and clutching their heads. The sound of the ancient words agony to the thing controlling them. Dot's sharp eye moved. He didn't use his knife. He used his hands, tackling one of the men, pinning him away from the stone. It was a fight of restraint, not killing. The stone. Talks to the Wind shouted over the chant. It must be anointed with water from the pool. Now, Ilara reacted. She grabbed the water skin from her belt and dashed back out through the waterfall, plunging it into the icy pool. Inside, Caleb faced the second hollow man, who was staggering toward Talks to the Wind, trying to stop the chant. This wasn't a fight he could win with strength. He remembered the entity's greatest weakness. He looked the hollow man in his glassy eyes and didn't see a monster. He saw the man he might have become. "Your name is Henry," Caleb said, the memory coming to him in a flash, a whisper from the entity's own stolen knowledge. "You have a daughter, Mary. She has hair like wheat. She's waiting for you back in Missouri." The hollow man Henry froze. A tremor racked his body. A flicker of profound confusion and pain crossed his vacant face. "Fight it, Henry," Caleb urged, his voice steady. "Remember, Mary, it can't take that from you unless you let it." It was a distraction, but a vital one. Ilara rushed back in, the water skin dripping. "What do I do?" She yelled to Talks to the Wind. "The water. On the stone. And speak his name. Speak Caleb's name. Pour your memory of him into it." Ilara understood. This wasn't just about ancient magic. It was about love. It was about identity against the emptiness. She poured the clear, icy water onto the obsidian disc. As it flowed over the dark surface, the swirling depths within seemed to glow with a soft, internal light. "Caleb." She cried out, pouring all her love, all her memories of her brother into the words. "I remember you. I remember your strength, your kindness, your life." The cave began to vibrate, not from the waterfall, but from the stone itself. A pure, clear tone rang out, a single note that held for an impossibly long time. The hollow men collapsed. The oppressive pressure in the air vanished, replaced by a profound ringing silence. The light from the stone faded. The ritual was complete. They stood in the cave panting, the only sound the relentless crash of the waterfall. The hollow men lay unconscious but breathing. The entity's influence had been severed. Is it over? Alara asked, her voice trembling. Talks to the Wind placed a hand on the now dry stone. He closed his eyes, listening to the mountain dot when he opened them. The grim look had not returned. Instead, there was a weary peace. The wound is closed, he said. The hunger is sealed away. Its voice is silent. He looked at the unconscious men. Their minds will be their own when they wake, though the memory of what they were will be a heavy burden. It was a victory. A complete and total victory. But as they helped the dazed, confused prospectors to their feet and led them out into the sunlight, Caleb stopped. He looked back at the sacred valley, then down at his own hands. The entity was gone. But the hole it had carved in him, the trauma, the memories of the cold and the whispers that remained. The battle was over, but the healing was just beginning. The mountain's secret was kept. But its price had been paid in the soul of a young man who had stared into the emptiness and somehow found his way back. The ritual worked. The entity is sealed away. But Caleb is left with the scars of his possession. How will he recover? What will happen to the prospectors and the corrupted government orders? And is the entity truly gone forever or just dormant? The external threat is over, but the internal journey remains. What is the final future for Alara, Caleb, and the Comanche? Predict the aftermath in the comments. The descent from the sacred valley was a journey back into a world that felt lighter. The oppressive weight of the mountain finally lifted. The three former Hollow men, whose names they learned were Henry, James, and Thomas, were confused and weak, but lucid. They remembered nothing of their possession, only a deep, lingering sense of dread and a gap in their memories. They were victims, not villains, and they clung to the group with the desperation of men rescued from a shipwreck. When they returned to Fort Wade, the change was palpable. The air of paranoid dread was gone. Captain Evans met them at the gate, his stern face etched with relief. The strange, corrupted telegraph orders had ceased as suddenly as they had begun, confirming the success of the ritual more surely than any words could. There was no grand celebration. The story of an ancient entity and a purification ritual was too vast, too strange, for most to fully comprehend or believe. Officially, the incident was logged as a case of mass hysteria among the prospectors, possibly caused by tainted water or minerals, which led to violence and strange behavior. The Comanche's involvement was noted as providing crucial aid and local knowledge. It was a story that would become a bizarre footnote in the territory's history, a legend few would fully believe, but for those who had been there, the truth was a quiet, unshakable bond. Colonel Briggs and his wagon train, forever changed, decided to settle in a valley far from the cursed mountain, their prejudice toward the Comanche replaced by a deep and lasting respect. They would tell the true story to their children, a secret to be passed down through generations. Captain Evans, a practical man forged in the fire of the impossible, made a quiet pact with Talks to the Wind. The mountain and the high sacred valleys would be marked on maps as a Comanche reservation, off limits to mining and settlement, protected by both tribal tradition and U.S. military decree. It was a small, fragile wall against the greed that had almost ended the world. A week later, Alara and Caleb stood on the porch of their homestead. The Comanche warriors were mounted, ready to return to their high villages. The silence between them was no longer tense, but filled with a mutual respect earned in the darkest of times. Talks to the Wind sat tall on his horse, his eyes on Caleb. "The shadow is gone from the land," he said. "But the fight leaves its mark on the warrior." His gaze was knowing. "The healing will be your own journey now. But you do not make it alone." He nodded to Alara. Caleb managed a small, genuine smile. It was the first one Alara had seen in what felt like a lifetime. "I know," he said. "Thank you. For everything." Talks to the Wind gave a final solemn nod. Then he turned his horse and led his warriors away, their figures growing smaller until they were swallowed by the vast morning light. Ilara and Caleb stood there for a long time, watching the empty land. The mountains still kept their secrets, but they no longer felt threatening. They just were. Caleb took a deep, clean breath of air. "It's quiet," he said. Not with fear, but with a sense of wonder. "It's peace," Ilara replied. Putting an arm around his shoulders, he looked at her, the ghosts in his eyes not gone, but finally held at bay. "It's going to be a long road, isn't it?" "Yes," she said simply. "But we'll walk it together. Just like we always have." They turned and walked back inside their home. The door closed, not on an ending, but on a beginning. The battle against the ancient darkness was over. The slower, quieter work of rebuilding a life had just begun. The mountains stood silent witness, their secrets once again safe, guarding the deep, healing silence they had fought so hard to win.